We heard a bunch of gunshots. We heard a crash.
I just saw suddenly loads of people run away from the market, and there was people lying on the ground.
I saw the knife and just didn't turn around again. I just ran.
This is the third terrorist attack Britain has experienced in the last 3 months.
People should remain calm and vigilant, carry on their normal business.
Manchester, I want you to make some noise right now, come on! You got my heart, don't know how you did it. I don't got the freezer, babe. I don't wanna run away. I feel what you make to me,
What's the love now? What's the love, y'all? What's the love now?
Thank you for coming tonight. I love you so much.
Welcome to Waters World. I'm Jesse Waters. As you just heard, the 3 jihadists who used a van to mow down unarmed victims are now dead, and 12 others arrested in connection to the deadly terror attack on London Bridge. Just a few hours ago, singer Ariana Grande returned to the stage 2 weeks after a suicide bombing killed 22 people at her concert in nearby Manchester. As of now, that concert has raised more than $2.6 million for victims of the attack. But how did we get here for the second time in as many weeks? Tolerating terrorism. That is the subject of tonight's Waters Words. Since 2015, there have been 13 terror attacks on the European continent, killing 304 people. Just this year alone in Great Britain, there have been 2 terror attacks, killing 29 people. Yet European leaders still have not woken up to the real threat of Islamic Jihad. NATO hasn't been activated. Borders are still wide open. Civilians are not allowed to arm themselves, and no new anti-terror doctrines have been enacted. How much bloodshed are the Europeans willing to tolerate? Perhaps Europe's bloody history from World War I and World War II creates a higher death threshold. But I'll tell you this amount of terror will never be tolerated in America, ever. Look at what's happening in the United Kingdom. 23,000 suspects in that country are currently being monitored, and authorities there believe 400 ISIS-trained fighters have returned to Britain from Iraq and Syria and are festering throughout that country. In 2012, left-wing civil liberties activists chipped away at the British government's ability to monitor terror suspects, their movements, their use of phones, and their computers. This was a grave mistake. Another mistake was the election of London Mayor Sadiq Khan, a Muslim who cares more about fighting with Donald Trump than fighting Islamic terrorism. Last May, the mayor of London tweeted this: Trump's ignorant view of Islam could make both our countries less safe. It risks alienating mainstream Muslims. London has proved him wrong. Actually, Mayor, you have been proven wrong. Since you held office, there have been 2 terror attacks in London. Since President Trump has been in office, there have been 0. After the London Bridge attack yesterday, the mayor of London never mentioned the phrase radical Islam, but he did say this.
Londoners will see an increased police presence today and over the course of the next few days. No reason to be alarmed.
No reason to be alarmed? I mean, of course people should be alarmed. He says it was because people shouldn't be alarmed at police. Why would they be alarmed at police? What they're really alarmed about is Islamic killers and their government's ability or inability to stop them. And they should be alarmed that the first mayor told them just to carry on with no mention of radical Islam or the Muslim communities in London that hide terrorists. Theresa May, who was up for re-election this week, said this:
Defeating this ideology is one of the great challenges of our time. But it cannot be defeated through military intervention alone. It will only be defeated when we turn people's minds away from this violence and make them understand that our values, pluralistic British values, are superior to anything offered by the preachers and supporters of hate.
With all due respect to the British Prime Minister, you're not going to convince Jihadi John to lay down his AK-47 because your pluralistic British values are superior to Sharia law. And it didn't help when she cut police on the street by 20,000. Here is what Aaron Cohen, former member of the Israeli Special Operations Counter-Terrorist Unit, said on what works against jihadists.
The only thing they are afraid of is fear. And until fear becomes part of our doctrine, and that's the essence, and that's the fabric of counterterror, means to put terror on the terrorist. Until the terrorist is put on the run, which they're not right now, then we are in fact
Aaron,
losing.
you're right.
If I was in charge of counterterror operations in London, and I would make it start raining search warrants. That's the first thing. I would be kicking down every door that smelled anything that caused an endermal reaction on the back of my neck, which caused the hair to raise. And I'm talking about warrants, and I'm talking about judges and laws, and this counterterror fight is as much as it is about tone. The laws have to reflect the tone of the collective nationally.
Sounds smart, doesn't it? Fortunately, America has not reached that point yet. Emphasis on yet.
This problem is not unique to London. It's happened across much of the rest of Europe. And can I say again on Fox News, please, Americans, let this be a warning to you. Your president wants to try to protect you, and yet your judiciary and some on Capitol Hill are trying to stop him.
And President Trump wasted no time reacting, tweeting this on the travel ban. We need to be smart, vigilant, and tough. We need the courts to give us back our rights. We need the travel ban as an extra level of safety. The travel ban is now on the way to the Supreme Court and could be decided as early this summer. Waters World will keep you posted on that. In conclusion, we cannot just fight terrorism with hashtags, benefit concerts, and marches alone. It's time to get tough, and it's time to make the terrorists feel the heat. Joining me now with his reaction to last night's horrific events in London, former CIA senior intelligence officer and senior fellow with the London Center for Policy, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer.
Hey, Jesse.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. So the mayor, Sadiq Khan, he doesn't seem to get it. He said last year that terror attacks are part and parcel of living in a major city. Seems defeatist for me. He's always getting into some sort of beef with President Trump.
Right.
What's going on with this mayor?
He might as well have, if World War II, he would have, if he was a mayor, I'm sure he would have welcomed Hitler into the city. I mean, this is a complete surrender. And Jesse, I'm glad you put it in that framework. Look, this is a war. He apparently doesn't recognize it's a war, and he's jeopardizing the very safety of his citizens. And instead of actually doing his job, he tweets out about Donald Trump abandoning the Paris Treaty and saying how it's going to impact him. It's not going to impact him. What impacts him is the terror around him. And Theresa May said today that they've tolerated the extremism far too long. I mean, the Lee Rigby assassination, the beheading of the British soldier back in 2013 should have been the beginning of the end for this, but it's not. It's enabled people like the mayor to actually continue this negligence, I would dare say it's planned, because you can't be this stupid as a mayor.
Well, I mean, hopefully it's not.
I
mean, hopefully it's not planned. It could be criminal negligence. We don't know about that. You know what else is pretty negligent? 90% of British police officers don't carry firearms.
That's insane.
And only 4% of British citizens are packing heat.
Right.
I mean, why do you think London and these countries are such soft targets? It's because no citizen's there to stop them in their tracks.
It's completely insane. I mean, I live in Virginia. I have a concealed carry permit. I was actually along for a ride-along with the sheriff detail in Stafford County who did protection for Governor Terry McAuliffe on Friday. Everybody was armed, and rightfully so. So the fact, as you point out, Jesse, that these folks are completely willing to unarm competent citizens who wish to be armed, and more importantly, police who should be armed, is really denotes the fact that they've completely further surrendered to the terrorists.
And they're also willing to let anybody come into that country. You know, much looser immigration policy over in the UK and other European countries.
Right.
When Trump says, you know, it's time for the travel ban as an extra layer of security, everybody goes ballistic across the pond, but people back in America, and if something like this happened, 3 attacks in 3 months, Americans would be going crazy right now looking for action.
Right. No, I said this morning you need to be on the offensive. Part of the offensive is doing better screening and preventing those who will do this from coming here. So President Trump has that idea. But to your point, Jesse, during the time that the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, was attacking England, the British used very tight controls of their borders for purposes of defeating the terrorists. And let me remind your audience and the British that they severely went after the IRA. They made the Irish terrorists fear for their lives, and we've not done that with the radical Islamists.
No, we haven't.
And also,
real quick, is NATO the appropriate mechanism to use on the continent? Is there a way to use NATO more effectively to kind of root out this evil over there or not?
Three ways. First, NATO has a history of this. I actually served undercover in Europe in '85, first with NATO, going after a number of German terrorist groups. So NATO has the experience. Secondly, sharing intelligence, and more importantly, the third factor is special operations. Jesse, Ms. May was polite this morning when she talked about the networks. She identified the fact as networks. Those networks exist in Europe. That's where this is a lot of us coming from. And NATO can go after those networks hook and claw if they're allowed to do so, and they should be directed to do so.
Absolutely. All right, well, Colonel Schaefer, thank you very much for your expertise.
Jesse. Thank you.
American Muslims say they despise ISIS, but are they doing enough? We're going to debate that next. And later, exposing the mainstream media's ridiculous coverage of last night's terror attacks. ISIS has officially claimed responsibility for last night's attack on the London Bridge. The attackers could be heard shouting, "This is for Allah." The question is, are American Muslims doing enough in the fight against ISIS? Joining me now, American Muslim and Daily Beast columnist Dean Obeidallah, and president of the American Islamic Forum, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. So, Dean, we're going to start with you. Sure. We had our people look for examples of Muslims in America protesting terrorism. And I got to be honest with you, we didn't find a lot of examples.
They're doing something better than protesting. They're actually turning in people who are extremists. The shooter in Orlando was turned in by a fellow Muslim from his mosque to the FBI. We have 1,000
That hasn't
Muslims.
been verified yet.
Mohammed Malik wrote an article about it.
Okay.
He wrote an article for the Washington Post saying he did.
Okay, but FBI sources have not verified that, but go ahead.
There are literally 1,000 Muslim Americans serving in the NYPD right now. Most of them are police officers. There's 5,000 Muslim Americans serving in our military, proudly defending all of our rights. We're out there. And within the Muslim community, there's a lot of work. There are imams working with the FBI at night because the radicalization is happening online.
I actually do think visually it would create a big kind of momentum shift if other Americans could see video of a massive amount of American Muslims out there on the streets protesting ISIS. Zuhdi, let me ask you this. There's a UK poll that came out of British Muslims, and it was very disturbing. It said this: 2 out of 3 Muslims in Britain would not give the government any information if they knew the details about a terror plot. What does that say to you?
Well, it says to me, listen to this conversation. It's almost as if Dean is still on 9/12/2001, and we're 16 years later. There's been an Arab awakening. There are large global movements, and the underbelly of terrorism, which is the final endpoint when they strap the belt on, the underbelly is this complicity, if you will, the homophobia, the anti-Semitism, the 30% that said they would chop the hands of those who steal, the 40% that said they would stone and commit acts that are medieval but part of Sharia law. So what the Dean Obeidallahs of the world, what the deans of the world are missing is they're in denial. We need a 12-step program. We think somehow that terrorism self-combusts out of nowhere, and we're not dealing with any of the precursors of radicalization. So therefore, Americans aren't stupid. They sort of say, wait a minute, you guys are doing the hashtag, email, fax condemnations, but you're doing nothing for your legacy, for your children, to fix the causes of this radicalization.
Yeah, Dean, I want you to respond to that. It seems like a lot of the Muslims here in America are more upset over Trump's travel ban than they are ISIS beheading people. What's that all about?
Just so it's clear, because I know a lot of my fellow Americans don't hear Muslims denounce terrorism. We just don't denounce it. We despise it. My Facebook feed today is filled with Muslims from around the world calling this attack out. ISIS is the enemy of Islam. Just so it's clear, it's not about Islam. It's not Islam versus the West. It's ISIS versus all of us. In
Well,
Afghanistan,
but it does have something to do with Islam. You would
I'm not
admit
denying
that.
If they weren't Muslim, they wouldn't be doing it. The reason they're doing it is different for each one. In Afghanistan this week, 90 people killed by ISIS. Those are Muslims they killed. At their funeral, 12 other people killed yesterday. That doesn't get covered in the West. So the problem with that is Americans don't see that ISIS is slaughtering Muslims. President Trump, to his credit, once out, he said 95% of the victims of ISIS are Muslims. And I applaud President Trump for making that statement there to make it clear to our fellow Americans. So we despise them. We want to see them eliminated, destroyed, and killed more than people of other faith want to see them because the backlash comes to our community.
Are you going to filibuster or listen?
Go ahead,
Hold
Doctor.
on. You're talking like a drunk at a bar who is saying that we're taking away the keys from the drunk drivers. We're really part of
That
it, but
makes
you're
no sense.
ignoring
Let
the
him finish,
substance.
Sean.
But let me finish what I'm saying. But you're also, by using Afghanistan and our families in Syria and others, over there they truly are threatened by the militants and they are the victims. But here, us reformers are the victims of you non-violent Islamists who marginalize
I'm a
them and
nonviolent
diminish
Islamist.
our...
Zudi, you just
so
called me a
therefore, right
nonviolent.
now,
This is ridiculous. Zudi, first of all, update your script. The fact you know nothing about going on in the Muslim community because you're rejected by our community. You're not around. People
Are you
don't even
kidding?
want you. Yes.
You
I'm
do
being
nothing
honest,
of
Zudi.
reform.
You're
You're ignoring the Sharia supremacist
You're a punchline. He's a
of
punchline to our
Sheffrey
community.
and other
Muslim
ideologies
Americans
you
are on the front
completely
line of
ignore.
this country,
Okay.
working with law enforcement.
Absolutely not. The
Listen, let him
Muslims
finish.
are on the
You know
front
what?
lines
Don't
are the ones that
insult
are not
him.
in the mosque.
Don't
He
insult
called me
him.
a drunk guy
Don't
driving.
insult. Listen, calling you a drunk guy was a euphemism.
It was not.
It was a figure of speech.
It was literal.
Okay, so let's not get too excited,
As long as
guys.
it's very bad.
I got to run, Dean Doctor. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
All right, up next, moments ago, Vladimir Putin breaking his silence about Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. And later, mainstream media exposing their true colors yet again. We'll show you what CNN is apologizing for today. Looking tonight, Russian President Vladimir Putin weighing in on the claims of Moscow meddling in the 2016 election. The Russian president denying those claims, telling NBC's Megyn Kelly there's simply no need to even bother interfering in the first place.
The United States, everywhere, all over the world, actively interferes with the electoral campaigns of other countries. Put your finger anywhere on the map of the world, and everywhere you will hear complaints that American officials are interfering in internal electoral processes. Presidents come and go, and even the parties in power change. But the main political direction does not change. That's why, in the grand scheme of things, we don't care who's the head of the United States. We know more or less what is going to happen.
Joining me now to break this down, Fox News chief national correspondent Ed Henry.
Good to see you.
So Putin's basically saying everybody interferes with elections except Russia.
Yeah, I mean, some of it was ridiculous. You know, the idea, I mean, he was saying, look, JFK may have been killed by the U.S. intelligence community, and so they could have hacked the election and made it look like the Russians did. It's
Right.
like, give me a break, Vlad. You know, this is ridiculous.
He said the CIA could have been the ones that hacked it, to blame Russia for this thing.
And blame Russia. But, you know, this is a great get for Megyn Kelly. Everybody wants this interview, but she couldn't break new ground. You know, to borrow a phrase from George W. Bush, Megyn Kelly looked into Vladimir Putin's eyes and could not see into his soul. He's impenetrable.
Well, that's
I mean,
because he's a former KGB agent,
he's
and he
bullied.
lies brilliantly.
And he was a bull, and he lies brilliantly. I mean, at one point he's talking about Michael Flynn, and this is maybe the big gotcha thing, because the mainstream media is making a big deal of this. General Flynn got paid a lot of money. He was at this dinner in Moscow. He was seated next to Vladimir Putin in 2015. There's something there, right?
Yeah.
And Vladimir Putin says, you know, I barely spoke to him, first of all, and then I found out after the dinner that he was like this big senior former official, might be a big deal with Donald Trump. Give me a break. Like the Kremlin.
Was that your Putin impression?
Yeah, that was a pretty weak comparison. But do you really think that the Kremlin didn't brief him, his officials?
Obviously.
Like, Mike Flynn is a big guy, and he could be even bigger with Donald Trump.
Obviously briefed. Also, Meg Kelly asked about these secret back channels that Jared Kushner might have been setting up with the Kremlin. Here's how he responded.
This is just amazing. You created a sensation out of nothing. And out of the sensation, you turned it into a weapon of war against the current president. Well, this is, you know, you people are so creative over there. Good job. Your lives must be boring.
You
basically
people
said you have no lives.
Like the media, you in America, you have no lives. Megyn Kelly pressed, do you have dirt on our president? And he said, this is another load of nonsense. Have you lost your senses over there? I mean, this is, and you know, he's like a master of body language. You know, Megyn Kelly's asking a question. He's sighing. He's looking at his shoes.
He's like rolling his eyes.
At one point, he's like,
that.
he was like clearing his throat while she's asking a question, rolling the eyes, smirking. She says, aren't your fingerprints on the American election and the hack? And he says, fingerprints, horn prints? What are you talking about? You know, so look, again, in fairness to Megyn, great get.
Yeah.
You know, she asked good questions. She was pressing him. But you can't, he's a KGB guy.
Now, let me ask you, if you were sitting across from Vlad, how would you go after the guy? I mean, he's a tough nut to crack. Do you have any suggestions?
You have to all but throttle him.
You have to grab him by the throat.
I would use the impersonation first. I would lead with the impersonation.
That'll soften him up.
What are you talking about? You know, it was a weak impersonation.
I know, I thought it was very good. You've obviously been practicing it. Does this make any headway with the whole Russian collusion thing? Is there anything to come out of this that one side or the other side can say, look at this, this proves this one way or the other?
No, and I think that is the biggest point, which is that months and months of investigations, and there'll be more, and there may be more that's found out. I don't want to say there's nothing there. There's obviously smoke. But is there fire here? Megyn Kelly asked a series of good questions, pressed the Russian president, the guy that everybody wants to talk to. And at the end of this interview, there was virtually nothing new.
Nothing new.
So for Donald Trump,
that's good news.
Pretty good interview.
All right. Ed, thank you very much. The left hysterical that the president put America first in the climate deal. But where's that same anger over last night's terror attacks? And still to come, my real news update of the week, stories you may not have heard. One of them involves Jerry Springer.
Savior.
Good evening, I'm Kelly Wright in Washington. Here's what's happening. Dueling protests in Portland, Oregon. Supporters of the president confront his opponents in heated exchanges. Demonstrators chanted USA and held banners in support of the president. They were met by hundreds of counter-protesters. Some threw objects at police, including bottles and rocks. Several arrests reported. And it follows last week's fatal stabbings on a Portland train. 2 men killed as they tried to stop an anti-Muslim tirade. Elsewhere throughout the news, just last week, we were talking to Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly, and he repeated that what we've heard for years now, that the United States is under a constant threat of terror attacks. The threat he's most concerned about, though, are plots targeting the aviation industry. That's a look at news this hour. Back now to Waters World.
And if you think that I'm still holding on to something, you should go and love yourself. When you told me that you hate.
That was Bieber, everybody. President Trump reacting strongly to the London terror attack on Twitter, taking a moment to reiterate some beliefs he's held since the beginning of his campaign. One tweet read, "We must stop being politically correct and get down to the business of security for our people. If we don't get smart, it will only get worse." Also, he tweeted, "Do you notice we are not having a gun debate right now? That's because they used knives and a truck." Joining me now, contributor for The Hill and author of Government Gone Wild, Kristen Tate, and executive editor at Bustle.com, Julie Alvin. So does Europe need to start banning knives and vans and everything like that?
I thought that was such a strange tweet, actually, because obviously, you know, Donald Trump's going to be against a gun control conversation. He kind of made the opposite of the point that he intended to, because he's saying, oh, we're not talking about gun control because they use knives in a truck. So therefore, 7 people died as opposed to this time last year, 49 people died in Orlando nightclub after Omar Mateen legally purchased 2 assault weapons, even though he had been on an FBI watch list. So we're not talking about gun control, but
I think the president's point is that every time there is an attack using a gun, liberals don't make it about Islamic terrorism, they make it about the gun. But if there is an Islamic attack using any other weapon, They don't talk about that weapon, and they don't even talk about Islamic terror either, do they, Kristen?
Right. No, this has nothing to do with guns. This has everything to do with radical Islamic terror. What happened in London was sad. It was horrific. It was tragic. But you know what? It's becoming the norm. And how many people have to die before those on the left, including the mainstream media, Jesse, will acknowledge the root of the problem? 7 dead in London, 22 dead at the Ariana Grande concert, 49 dead in Orlando, 130 dead in France, Paris. I could go on
When
and
the
on.
president's saying we need to stop with the PC stuff, what do you think he's referring to?
I'm not really sure. I mean, I think that we...
How can you not be sure?
I mean,
They
who is
refuse to
saying-
acknowledge the actual root of the problem. Political correctness is literally killing us.
I am a
now.
liberal person, and I fully acknowledge this is a problem with radical Islamic terror.
Oh, wait, did everybody hear that? Wow, you
Write
heard it
it
here
down.
first.
Write it down.
All right, I'm going to keep that soundbite for later. All right, President Trump announcing this week he's pulling the United States out of the Paris Climate Accord, which is a deal with other countries to combat climate change, but America was footing much of the bill, losing jobs, all for very little in return. But if you listen to the liberal media, it will lead to human extinction.
On a sunny day in Rose Garden, what could be defined and construed as a dark speech.
I have such rage and sadness. We just watched a dangerous little man give a very, very scary speech.
One of the most bleak depictions of America's role in the world as environmental partners.
He is not helping the forgotten American. He is hurting them. Their kids will have worse asthma in the summer, and the president who talked about putting America first has now put America last.
This was full nationalist, America first, damn the rest of the world, President Trump.
It was almost like Mad Libs for conservatives.
And that's not all. Celebrities are getting in on the outrage, too. Bette Midler tweeting, there has never in U.S. history been such a destructive megalomaniac in the White House. Thank you to U.S. press and other numbskulls who put him there. Wow. I really don't know what to say about that. Why do you think these celebrities are so upset about the potential for one person to die 100 years from now, but they're not actually upset when ISIS kills people in London?
Well, who's saying that they're not upset that ISIS is killing people?
Look at all
in
these
London?
celebrities coming out of the woodwork over the climate deal. They haven't said anything about
Have
the
you looked
UK
through all
terror
their Twitter
attacks.
I think that this is misguided. If you watched every liberal news channel all day today, they were all talking about the London terror attacks.
No, thank you. I will not subject myself to that. Kristen, what do you make about all this chaos going on the left? It seems like they can't believe this actually happened, even though the president said he was going to pull out.
Yeah, this is so predictable. This has nothing to do with the environment and everything to do with politics. There is no evidence that being in the Paris Agreement would do anything to save the environment, but this is just the anti-Trump story of the week. You know, under the agreement, rich countries like the United States agreed to give $100 billion to poor countries to help them transition to green energy. Obama committed $3 billion. Guess how much China committed? $0. And they are the biggest polluters in the world. This was an America Last policy, and Americans are very glad that Trump pulled us out.
Julie, can I show you something I think you're going to like? This is a tweet from our friend Rob O'Neill, who shot bin Laden. He said this: some governments tell us that there is nothing they can do to stop terror, but they can lower the temperature of the planet. Don't you see the irony there?
I mean, I don't know I don't know what governments are saying there's nothing that they can do to stop terror. This is something that people across on all sides of the aisle are concerned about.
We've seen a lot
As
of
far
people
as-
over in Europe saying we have to get used to this. This is part and parcel of living in a big city.
I think that that is a misinterpretation of what the mayor of London said, and today he was saying
I would
that...
never misinterpret anything the mayor said, but go ahead.
Today he was saying, you know, people were saying, oh, he said not to be alarmed. He said, don't be alarmed when you see increased police presence. We are all coming together to fight this issue and make this city safer.
Well, police make me feel safer. That doesn't alarm me at all. I want to play you, Chris, in a soundbite from your friend John Kerry, who said this about President Trump. Go ahead.
And when Donald Trump says to the world, well, we're going to negotiate a better deal, I mean, you know, he's going to go out and find a better deal. That's like O.J. Simpson saying he's going to go out and find the real killer. Everybody knows he isn't going to do that.
So is he saying The president's the real killer? Is that the analogy?
Apparently. I mean, look, everyone in America who actually works for a living and has a brain understands what's going on here. This is an effort to try and take down Trump and incite hysteria within the population to, again, take down the president. But again, this Paris Agreement really did nothing to help the environment, and this is going to help businesses by taking us out of this. So I think working people in this country are happy about this decision.
And you're a working person, so you should be very happy, Julie.
I'm an intelligent working person, and I have to say I think this is a mistake withdrawing from the Paris Accords. The way that pacts like this work, it's peer pressure. If the second greatest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions pulls out, what's that going to do to all the other countries that
We're
are
not
involved?
going to base our policies off peer pressure, okay?
Is going to pay
Guys,
the price.
we got to run. Up next, mainstream media says Donald Trump is hoping for an attack on U.S. soil. Wait until you hear this. And still ahead, my real news update of the week. That was Katy Perry with a new haircut performing Roar at the Ariana Grande benefit concert earlier today. The pop singer also said this to fans in the aftermath of the terrorist attacks.
Just touch the next person. Touch the person next to you. Make human contact. Tell them I love you. Look in their eyes. Say I love you. I encourage you to choose love even when it's difficult. Let no one take that away from you.
Choose love. Interesting strategy. Also, Bette Midler chimed in after radical Islamists stabbed and mowed down innocent civilians, tweeting, "More sorrow and grief at the hands of madmen in London. Men and religion are worthless." Earth to Bette. Christians didn't slaughter people in London Bridge. Neither did Jews or Buddhists. And one of the San Bernardino terrorists was a woman. Joining me now, media reporter and columnist for The Hill, Joe Concha. When these terror attacks happen and these celebrities come out of the woodwork and say things like fight terrorism with love or men and religion are bad, how do you process that?
She was the wind beneath my wings, Jesse. Now, Bette's disappointed me. Yeah, she got ran over by George Costanza once on Seinfeld, if you remember the softball game. But, hey, like Ariana Grande. Muy Grande.
Yeah.
Big in Spanish, right? Isn't that great? She didn't write a check. She didn't start a hashtag campaign.
Yes.
Went right back to Manchester, did this great concert. So we bash celebrities all the time. This was a great moment.
I think she did the right thing. And she raised, I think it was $2.6 million. And a lot of people showed up, about 50,000 or something like that. So that was great. So also as terror broke out on the streets of London last night, Donald Trump tweeted this: "We need to be smart, vigilant, and tough. We need the courts to give us back our rights. We need the travel ban as an extra level of safety." That tweet setting off Reza Aslan, the host of Believer on CNN, who had some very choice words for the commander-in-chief, tweeting, "This piece of bleak is not just an embarrassment to America and a stain on the presidency. He's an embarrassment to humankind." CNN was forced to apologize again. But the mainstream media's attacks on the president didn't end there. Over at 30 Rock, NBC sent out this dismissive comment after the president referred to the situation as a terror attack. "President Trump has used Twitter to share news reports on London incident. We aren't relaying the president's retweet as the info is unconfirmed." Don't you think the commander-in-chief with access to all of America's intelligence resources would know before an NBC producer in New York if an attack on our strongest ally was terrorism? Why do that if you're NBC?
They didn't bother to check Sean Spicer's feed that said 45 minutes before that NBC News tweet went out, which was dismissive and condescending, that the president had been briefed on the situation by his national security team. So it wasn't like Trump was just going off the top of his head. He had that information. For NBC to do that, to throw shade, as they say in the business, didn't reflect well on them. As for Reza Aslan, I got a statement from CNN. They said that Reza Aslan is not a CNN employee, but he does host a series on the network.
Interesting.
That is interesting. We're pleased that he apologized for his tweets, That kind of discourse is never appropriate. Okay, so Aslan apologized, but with apologies needs to come accountability in some capacity. CNN needs to say, this guy isn't going to be on our air for a while. They stopped short of doing that, and I don't understand how you could be a CNN, not a CNN employee, but a host of series on the network. He's doing it for free, Jesse, like you.
Wasn't Kathy Griffin also not a CNN employee, but hosted a New Year's Eve special?
Once a year, right?
Okay,
but they were forced to fire her, right?
So I don't know what's going on over there. I don't want to find out. Also, something that really bothered me, I think it was, what was his name?
Thomas Roberts.
Thomas Roberts over at MSNBC, I think was responding to something Trump tweeted. Trump tweeted, "We must stop being politically correct and get down to the business of security for our people. If we don't get smart, it will only get worse." Here's what Roberts said in response. Well, there's the tweet.
The president doesn't want us to be politically correct, right? So let's not be PC about this. Is the president trying to provoke a domestic terrorist attack with this Twitter rant, because only to prove himself right?
What kind of question is that? Was that a hypothetical question, a rhetorical question?
Jesse, let's be clear. You're an opinion host,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes you're a pundit on the 5. He's an anchor.
Yeah.
To your audience, right, that's what Bret Baier is.
Yeah.
Picture Bret Baier asking a question like that, which implies that a sitting president would want to do harm, or would want harm to come, or even death to come to his own citizens just to prove a point because his ego is so big. That is the same thing as 9/11, the George W. Bush administration was behind that attack. It's that kind of charge, and an anchor has no business saying that. We haven't seen an apology from NBC yet. We haven't seen an apology from Thomas Roberts either, but this is reckless stuff, and this shows you where we are now in terms of rhetoric.
It is reckless. It's outrageous. You, as a media guy, should send over a note to those people and say, listen, what is your response? Are you going to apologize? Maybe you'll be able to get something out of them. I also want to show something. I found it amusing. This was when everybody knew this was a terror attack. This was what was on CNN. Stabbing rampage, van attack. A van attack. So it wasn't a terror attack. We knew very, very early. I think that was at like 9:30. Everybody knew it was a terror attack. CNN calling it a van attack. Attack of the vans, the killer vans.
Yeah, and NBC called it a security incident.
A security incident.
For a while, too, where there were about 1,000 witnesses saying that a van just plowed down some folks on London Bridge.
You know what that reminds me of? It reminds me of workplace violence in Fort Hood.
That's a very good analogy.
They just twist everything around so they don't have to say radical Islamic terror attack. Joe, thanks for coming on.
Jesse, to see you.
Real news of the week update, like this actual State Department briefing.
Does the administration believe that democracy is a buffer or barrier or against extremism?
Find out if he ever answers the question.
Florida.
General James Mattis was on CBS Face the Nation last Sunday and said this.
What keeps you awake at night?
Nothing. I keep other people awake at night.
Did you catch that? Let's hear it again.
What keeps you awake at night?
Nothing. I keep other people awake at night.
That's why we all love Mad Dog Mattis. Former VP Joe Biden creating a PAC for 2020, fueling speculation that he may run against Donald Trump in 4 years. What a matchup that would be. And what an amazing amount of material candidate Joe Biden would provide for Waters World.
His mom lived in Long Island for 10 years or so. God rest her soul. And although your mom's still alive as your dad passed. God bless her soul.
As Barack says, a 3-letter word, jobs. J-O-B-S, jobs.
You cannot go to a 7-Eleven or a Dunkin' Donuts unless you have a slight Indian accent. I'm not joking.
Folks, I can tell you, and I've known 8 presidents, 3 of them minimally.
Stand up, Chuck. Let him see you. Oh, God love you. What am I talking about? I tell you what, you're making everybody else stand up, though, pal.
Chuck was in a wheelchair. But you know who would provide even more entertainment than Biden running? Jerry Springer. Top Ohio Democrats are urging the talk show host to run for Ohio governor in 2018. I can only imagine the attack ads. Jerry. Okay. Fielding questions from the press can be a tough job. Here is Acting Assistant Secretary of State Stuart Jones responding to a question about the difference between Iran's record on democracy and our allies' record on democracy, Saudi Arabia.
Does the administration believe that democracy is a buffer or barrier against extremism?
Yes, he did answer the question, eventually. Bill Maher sinking to a new low this week, using the N-word in an interview on his show.
We'd love to have you work in the field with us. Work in the field? That's part of that. Senator, I'm a house. No.
Wow. Now for your fake news story of the week. While everybody was covering Kathy Griffith this week, CNN was using unnamed sources to bash the president. Roll the tape.
Being president is not agreeing with the president. He complained that his first trip overseas was going to be too long, that he wasn't looking forward to it, and he returned to the White House angry. He's gained weight, according to these sources. He doesn't trust people around him. He's withdrawing. Not a good picture. It's the one being painted by those sources.
So the president's fat, angry, and hates to travel. Got it, CNN. Up next, tweets of the night.